What would you do if a 6-year-old child looked you in the eye and said, "It hurts when I sit"? Would you pause? Would you ask more? Or would your mind race, imagining the unthinkable? This is not just a story about a little girl. It's a story about how silence can scream, how pain can hide behind innocent eyes, and how sometimes the most powerful cry for help is just 5 words long. She walked into her classroom like any other day, backpack on her shoulders, shoes barely tied, a hesitant smile on her face. No one suspected a thing, not her classmates, not the hall monitors, not even the teacher, until he noticed the way she kept shifting in her seat, wincing, avoiding sitting altogether. And then came the moment, when the teacher crouched beside her and gently asked, "Are you okay?" And she whispered, "It hurts when I sit." That one sentence changed everything, because behind those 5 words was a storm of truth, a truth no 6-year-old should ever have to carry. This video dives into that moment, not just what happened, but why it matters, because this is not just about one little girl. This is about the thousands of children whose pain goes unnoticed, the abuse that hides behind closed doors, the cries for help we miss because we're too busy, or too scared, or too uncertain to act. If you've ever felt the ache of injustice, if you believe that no child should ever suffer in silence, then stay with me. And if this story moves you, if it makes you think, feel, or reflect, please do 3 things. Like this video to help it reach more people. Comment below if you've ever seen signs and didn't know what to do. And subscribe to the channel, because together we can bring light into the darkest corners. The story begins now. It was early morning at Lincoln Elementary School in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia. The sun had just begun to stretch its light across the playground as children rushed through the school gates, clutching lunchboxes and backpacks, their voices rising in a chorus of excitement and sleepy yawns. Among them was a little girl named Amaya. She was 6 years old, with deep brown eyes and braids adorned with pastel-colored beads that clicked softly when she moved. To anyone watching, she looked like any other child, maybe a bit quiet, maybe a little too cautious, but nothing alarming. Her pink jacket was zipped to the top, her shoes a size too big, and her face wore the forced smile of someone pretending everything was fine. The classroom buzzed with routine, the pledge, the morning announcements, the shuffle of notebooks being pulled from desks. Amaya took her seat at the back, close to the window, where the sunlight barely reached. It was a place she liked, quiet, tucked away, just out of focus. But something was different that morning. Mr. Thompson, her first-grade teacher, noticed it first. Noticed how Amaya didn't sit down immediately like the others, how she lingered by her desk, hesitating, shifting from one foot to the other. When she finally sat, it was slow, guarded, like every inch downward took effort. He watched her wince, bite her lip, then try to focus on her workbook. At first he said nothing. Teachers often walk a fine line between discipline and compassion. But this wasn't about homework or daydreaming. It was the way she flinched, as if the chair itself was the enemy, the way she avoided eye contact, the way her hand hovered protectively near her lower back, almost instinctively. Still, the day moved on. The class read stories, practiced counting by 2s and 5s, and colored pictures of farm animals. Amaya did her work quietly, perfectly, as if staying invisible was her greatest strength. She barely spoke, barely smiled, but Mr. Thompson kept watching. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just a teacher's intuition. It was something deeper, a knot in his stomach, a silent alarm that had gone off somewhere inside him. He had seen this kind of guardedness before. Years ago, when another child in another district had tried to hide her pain behind perfect attendance and polite answers. He decided not to let it go. After lunch, during quiet reading time, he walked over to her desk, knelt beside her, and asked gently, "Hey, Amaya, everything okay today?" She didn't look up at first. Then slowly, she turned to him and whispered the words that would stop his heart. "It hurts when I sit." That was it. No tears, no elaboration. Just 6 words, delivered with the quiet weight of someone used to being ignored. In that instant, everything changed. Mr. Thompson had heard many things in his years as a teacher, excuses about missing homework, silly playground confessions, even heartfelt secrets whispered in shaky voices, but nothing ever hit him like what Amaya said that day. "It hurts when I sit." Her voice didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't fill with tears. She wasn't looking for pity. She was stating a fact, quiet, resigned, like it had been true for a long time. He felt his throat tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "Can you tell me where it hurts, sweetie?" Amaya hesitated. Her tiny fingers gripped the edge of her chair. She looked down at her knees, her braids falling like a curtain. "Here," she said, pointing slightly behind her, then softer. "I don't like chairs anymore." It was a strange thing for a child to say, but in her words there was something heavy, something that made his skin prickle. He knew then that this wasn't a scraped knee or a sore muscle. This was something deeper, something darker. The look in her eyes was what broke him the most. That vacant practice stare children sometimes wear when they've learned not to expect kindness. It wasn't fear, it was distance, as if her mind had been trained to go somewhere else, anywhere else. He gently asked if she wanted to go to the nurse. She shook her head no. He asked if she had fallen. She shrugged. He asked if anyone had hurt her. Silence, but her body spoke louder than words. The way she sat with one side slightly lifted, her muscles tense, the way her hand rested protectively on her lap, the way she avoided looking at his face. Mr. Thompson didn't push. He knew the signs. He knew that rushing her might make her shut down completely, but he also knew that a teacher's silence in moments like this can be as dangerous as any bruised skin. He had been through training. He had read the manuals, but none of that could prepare him for the raw truth of a child in pain right in front of him. He stood up, walked slowly to his desk, and picked up the phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad. He didn't need to call the nurse. He needed to call someone who could protect her, someone who could investigate. 911. It was a decision that took 10 seconds, but it would change the course of Amaya's life. As he dialed, his eyes remained on her. She was staring out the window now at the playground where other kids were running and laughing. Her face was still, too still. The operator answered, and he gave the school's address in a low voice. He explained that one of his students had disclosed something that might indicate abuse, that she seemed physically uncomfortable, that he couldn't ignore what she had said. The operator promised help was on the way. Mr. Thompson hung up, his heart pounding. He returned to her desk, sat beside her quietly and said, "You're very brave, Amaya. You did the right thing." She didn't respond. But for the first time that day, her eyes blinked with something new. Not fear, not sadness, relief. In schools across America, teachers juggle more than just lesson plans and lunchroom duty. They carry invisible burdens, watching over children who may never say a word, children whose pain hides in plain sight. For Mr. Thompson, that responsibility became real the moment Amaya whispered her truth. He couldn't teach another subject that day. The classroom felt different, quieter, heavier. While the children colored in their reading journals, he kept one eye on Amaya, the other on the clock. He knew Child Protective Services would be there soon, but every passing minute felt like an hour, and yet he never left her side. He moved her to a reading cushion on the floor, offered her a soft pillow, and told her she didn't have to sit at her desk if it hurt. She nodded once and curled her legs underneath her. No words, just that same distant calm. But inside, she was unraveling. He could see it, the way her small fingers picked at the seams of her sleeve, the way her eyes flicked toward the door every time it opened. She didn't trust the silence, and why would she? For children like Amaya, silence is where secrets live. Silence is what adults use to pretend nothing is wrong. But Mr. Thompson had made a decision that morning. He would not be another adult who stayed silent. He had once attended a seminar on trauma-informed teaching, where a child psychologist said something he'd never forgotten. Children rarely lie about pain. They lie to protect the people who cause it. That phrase echoed in his mind now, like a warning and a guide. So he did what good teachers do. He turned his classroom into a safe space. He kept the routine moving, reading, music, snack time, but checked on her every few minutes. He didn't hover. He didn't interrogate. He just made sure she knew he was there, watching, protecting. Finally, a knock at the door. 2 professionals stood there, one in a suit, the other in plain clothes with a badge around her neck. Social workers. They spoke in soft voices and asked to speak to Mr. Thompson privately. The class was temporarily handed over to the assistant teacher, and Amaya was gently asked to join them in the counseling office. The moment she stood up, the slight limp in her walk said more than any words ever could. Mr. Thompson led them down the hallway, his heart pounding. As the child welfare agent began asking Amaya basic questions, he stepped out of the room. He didn't want to interfere, but he also couldn't stop worrying. In that hallway, leaning against the wall, he remembered a time he'd ignored a different student's strange behavior. The boy had missed a week of school, and when he returned, he wore long sleeves in 90-degree heat. Mr. Thompson had noticed but said nothing. Weeks later, that boy was removed from his home. The guilt had never left him. This time he didn't ignore the signs. This time he acted. And that decision, made in a few minutes, may have saved Amaya's life. The system is far from perfect. Teachers are underpaid, overworked, and often unsupported. But in that moment, one teacher's attention, compassion, and courage made the difference between another day of silence and the beginning of justice. As Amaya sat in the office answering questions with her small voice and her big, painful truth, something shifted. She wasn't just a little girl in trouble anymore, she was a little girl being heard. Those 5 words echoed through Mr. Thompson's mind like a siren long after Amaya was escorted to the counseling office. "It hurts when I sit." He couldn't unhear them. They weren't just words, they were a signal, a rupture in the fabric of childhood that screamed for attention. For Amaya, that sentence had not come easily. Children who are abused often learn early how to protect their abusers, how to craft half-truths, how to avoid saying too much. But in that moment, her body had betrayed her silence. Pain had pushed past her training. What she couldn't say in full, her eyes and posture had already told. In the office, the child welfare agent, Ms. Ramirez, knelt to Amaya's level. Her voice was soft but firm, not demanding but inviting. "Can you tell me a little more about what's been hurting, sweetheart?" Amaya didn't cry. She didn't shrink, but her voice was no louder than a whisper. She pointed again to the same spot near her lower back and said, "Sometimes he hits me when I don't sit still, or if I spill something." "Who hits you?" Ms. Ramirez asked gently. "My mom's friend," Amaya replied. "The man that sleeps on our couch." The room stood still. That single revelation changed everything. Until then, there had been suspicion. Now there was confirmation. Now there was a name, a location, a pattern of behavior. And most painfully, now there was a child describing a cycle of violence as if it were part of her everyday routine. "Ms. Ramirez asked if he had touched her in other ways." Amaya hesitated. Then she nodded. That nod hit harder than any words could. It wasn't just about bruises anymore. It was about violations far deeper, more permanent, violations no child should ever endure. A nurse was brought in immediately to conduct a physical assessment, accompanied by a child advocate and a law enforcement officer trained in trauma response. Amaya flinched at first when they approached, but when Mr. Thompson peeked through the doorway and gave her a quiet nod of encouragement, she allowed the examination to begin. The nurse found physical signs consistent with what Amaya had described. Bruising in places no 6-year-old should have bruises, inflammation, clear markers of chronic abuse. Everything froze in that moment. The school staff, now informed, moved swiftly. District officials were called. Child Protective Services opened an emergency investigation. The police went to Amaya's home, where they found her mother visibly shaken but not surprised. The man she lived with had already fled. And while all this unfolded in the adult world of reports and warrants and protective custody, Amaya sat in a chair in the counselor's office, her legs dangling, her face blank. She asked for her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Waffles, from her backpack. She hugged it tightly and waited. She didn't cry. Not yet. She had already learned how to wait for safety, for permission to fall apart. What made this moment unbearable was not just the horror of what had happened, but how close it had come to going unnoticed. How easy it would have been for Mr. Thompson to dismiss her discomfort as nothing. How simple it would have been for another adult to say, "She's just shy," or "Kids exaggerate." But 5 words stopped everything. "It hurts when I sit." Words spoken without tears, without drama, but with devastating clarity. In a world where children's voices are often dismissed, where black girls in particular are too often seen as strong or resilient rather than vulnerable, Amaya's quiet statement became a thunderclap. A moment that forced adults to see her not as a problem, but as a child in need of protection. By the time Amaya was placed into temporary protective custody that evening, the full picture had begun to take shape. The truth, piece by painful piece, started unraveling, and what it revealed was far more than a single incident. It was a pattern, a history, a hidden world of harm she had been forced to survive in silence. The man who hurt her, known only as Uncle Darren in the household, was not her relative. He was her mother's on-and-off boyfriend, a transient figure who floated in and out of their small apartment, depending on his luck, his money, or his mood. He drank. He shouted. He sometimes disappeared for days, but when he returned, the atmosphere shifted. Amaya described it like, "The air gets scary." She told the social worker that she would often pretend to be asleep when he was around, that she hated bedtime, that sometimes he would come into her room after her mother had gone to work the night shift, that he told her not to tell, that if she did, bad things would happen. Those bad things weren't just threats. Amaya recalled being locked in the bathroom for hours, being slapped for spilling cereal, being made to sleep on the floor, being touched in ways that made her stomach hurt. Each detail she shared was another dagger, another reminder of how much she had endured. Alone, voiceless, invisible. But now her voice was being heard. The investigators brought in a forensic interviewer trained in child trauma. In a softly lit room with toys and picture books, Amaya recounted more of what she had experienced. Not all of it at once. Sometimes she stopped. Sometimes she stared off into the distance. But every time she opened her mouth, a little more truth spilled out. And with every truth came the same question in the minds of the adults in the room. How did no one see this? The neighbors had heard shouting. One said they'd seen Amaya limping before but assumed she'd fallen at school. Another admitted they'd heard crying at night but thought it was just a bad dream. Even her mother, when questioned, appeared overwhelmed but defensive. She claimed she never saw bruises, never heard screams. She said Darren was rough but not a monster. But the evidence now said otherwise. Her neglect, willful or oblivious, had left Amaya exposed. At school, Mr. Thompson was still shaken. When he learned the full extent of what Amaya had revealed, he had to step outside and sit on the steps behind the faculty lounge. He wept quietly, not just out of sorrow but out of anger. Anger that a child could live through such torment right under everyone's noses. Anger that she had to phrase her pain so carefully, so passively, just to be believed. Anger that if she had said nothing, she might have gone home that night to another episode of horror. Because that's how it happens, isn't it? Children endure. They adapt. They shrink themselves and memorize lies just to make it through the day. And the world, busy and distracted, lets them slip through the cracks. But now, Amaya was no longer slipping. Her pain had a name. Her truth had weight. And the adults in charge were finally doing what should have been done long ago, protecting her. As she was taken to a safe house with a foster family trained to handle trauma cases, she held on to Mr. Waffles, her stuffed rabbit. The caseworker buckled her into the back seat and promised, "You're safe now." For the first time in her short life, that might have been true. The phone call Mr. Thompson made that morning was short, less than 2 minutes, but what it set in motion would ripple through departments, trigger protocols, and ignite a small army of professionals whose job was to keep children like Amaya safe. When he pressed those 3 numbers, 911, he wasn't just calling for help. He was declaring that something was not okay, that the quiet suffering of a 6-year-old girl mattered enough to disrupt the routine of a school day, to bring strangers into her life, and to challenge whatever illusion of stability she had been surviving under. The dispatcher on the line listened carefully. She asked Mr. Thompson to describe what had happened. He chose his words deliberately, soft enough not to alarm the other children, but clear enough to communicate the gravity. "One of my students disclosed physical pain related to sitting. There's a history of silence." She pointed to her lower back and winced. "I suspect abuse." The dispatcher didn't ask for speculation. She took down the details and immediately dispatched both Child Protective Services and a unit from the local precinct trained in child response. The wheels turned quickly. In less than an hour, officials were at the school, meeting with administrators and preparing to speak with Amaya in a way that would not re-traumatize her. While that was happening, a parallel process had begun, one that most people never see. A chain of documentation, prioritization, and emergency response unfolded. A case number was assigned. Her name entered a protected database. Red flags were marked next to her home address, and patrol officers were alerted in case the alleged abuser returned to the scene. This is what the system is supposed to do. But the truth is, it often doesn't move this fast. Children like Amaya can wait days, even weeks, before intervention. What made the difference this time was one teacher who didn't doubt his instincts, who didn't minimize her words, who didn't say, "Let's wait and see." And that decision to act immediately meant that when officers arrived at her home later that day, they didn't just find an empty apartment. They found neighbors willing to talk, evidence of neglect, and signs that the man in question had packed in a rush. The officers collected what they could: a stained pillow, a belt, a smartphone left behind. These pieces of evidence would later help build the case. But more importantly, the home was no longer a hiding place. It was now a scene under investigation. Amaya, meanwhile, was being taken seriously. She wasn't treated as a suspect. She wasn't interrogated. The child response team used techniques designed to make her feel safe, to let her guide the conversation, to build trust slowly. They didn't push. They listened, and they believed her. Back at school, Mr. Thompson sat down to write his formal report. It was part of the procedure, but it felt anything but procedural. Every word he wrote felt like it carried her voice. He described her discomfort, her words, her body language, and his own emotional reaction. He didn't downplay it. He didn't leave it vague. Because he knew. The system only works if the people inside it are brave enough to speak clearly. Later, when the detective handling the case read his report, she would say, "This is one of the clearest, most compassionate documents I've seen from a teacher." Compassion matters. Amaya's journey toward justice didn't start in a courtroom. It started with a phone call. A call that said, "I see this child and I will not look away." When Amaya walked into school that morning, it was just another building, a place with desks and pencils and songs about the alphabet. But by the end of the day, Lincoln Elementary had become something else entirely. It became a sanctuary, a shield, a turning point. As word spread among the faculty that a child in their care had disclosed abuse, a wave of quiet urgency moved through the halls. The principal closed her office door and cancelled her afternoon meetings. The school nurse called in extra support. The counselor postponed sessions to remain fully available for Amaya. Everything began to orbit around her. While these adults had different roles, some managing paperwork, others comforting children, others calling legal guardians, they were now united by a single truth. They had a responsibility to protect this little girl, and it had to happen now. The first safe space Amaya entered was the counselor's office. Ms. Johnson, a warm and steady woman with a deep understanding of childhood trauma, sat with Amaya and held space for her. Not pressing, not overwhelming, just creating an environment where Amaya didn't have to pretend anymore. Amaya was offered apple juice and a soft blanket. She chose a beanbag in the corner of the room, curled into it with Mr. Waffles, her stuffed rabbit, and didn't speak for several minutes. Ms. Johnson didn't fill the silence. She waited. Eventually, Amaya asked, "Am I going to be in trouble?" Ms. Johnson knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. You're brave, and we're going to take care of you." That moment cracked something inside Amaya. Her eyes welled up, not with terror, but with release. Someone was finally saying what she had needed to hear all along: "You are not to blame." While she rested in the counselor's room, the child welfare team coordinated with the police, school staff, and a local trauma-informed foster agency. They needed a placement that same day, not just any home, but one prepared to care for a child who had been violated, who might wake up crying, who might flinch at sudden noises or avoid hugs. Thankfully, there was a family, a retired teacher and her partner, who had taken in children like Amaya before. They had the training, the patience, the warmth, and they had space. Meanwhile, the school handled the remaining children delicately. The assistant teacher led story time. The music teacher came in for an impromptu sing-along. No one told the class what had happened, but they didn't need to. Children sense things, and they knew that something serious was happening. When Amaya's temporary guardians arrived, she was introduced slowly. Ms. Johnson sat beside her and explained, "These nice people are going to take you to a safe place for now. You'll have your own bed, your own toys, and you can bring anything you want with you." Amaya clutched her backpack and Mr. Waffles. She didn't speak, but she nodded. As she walked down the hall, hand in hand with the foster mom, she passed Mr. Thompson, who stood at the end of the hallway. Their eyes met. He knelt and said, "You're so strong, Amaya. I'm really proud of you." She looked at him, quietly for just a moment, and whispered, "Thank you." That was it. No hugs, no tears, just a tiny voice reaching across a vast distance to acknowledge that someone had seen her and done something. In that moment, Lincoln Elementary wasn't just a school. It was a bridge, from darkness to light, from silence to voice, from danger to safety. And for Amaya, it was the first place where someone told her she mattered, and meant it. Amaya's story didn't happen in a vacuum. It unfolded in a neighborhood where houses sat close together, where porch lights flickered at dusk, and where people nodded politely but rarely intervened. Her suffering was not only shaped by the cruelty of one man, it was prolonged by the silence of many. When investigators canvassed the apartment complex, they knocked on doors, showed badges, asked questions. A few neighbors offered vague sympathy. Some said they didn't want to get involved. Others admitted they'd heard things but couldn't be sure. Shouting, crying, thuds in the night. None of it had been enough to make them act. One woman in the unit above recalled hearing a loud bang months earlier, followed by muffled sobs. "I figured they were just fighting," she said. "It's not my business." Another man remembered seeing Amaya walk stiffly with bruises on her legs. "Kids fall all the time," he shrugged. Didn't want to accuse nobody of nothing. These weren't cruel people. They were regular folks, tired, overworked, fearful of the consequences of stepping in. But their hesitation came at a cost. Each moment they looked the other way, each time they told themselves it's probably nothing, was another moment Amaya remained in danger. This is what collective silence looks like. It's the neighbor who turns up the volume on the television instead of calling the police. The teacher who assumes a child's shyness is just personality. The friend who suspects something but fears being wrong. And it's a dangerous silence, especially for black children. Studies have shown that black girls are often adultified, seen as more mature and less vulnerable than their white peers. Their pain is minimized. Their stories are doubted. Their cries for help are too often dismissed as exaggerations or bad behavior. Amaya's case was no exception. One school staff member, upon hearing what had happened, said quietly, "She never seemed like the type to break down, always so quiet and composed, as if stoicism could shield a child from abuse. As if suffering isn't sometimes worn like a second skin, silent, invisible, but always there. The truth is, Amaya had been screaming for a long time, just not with words. She screamed with the way she avoided eye contact, with the way she winced when sitting, with her silence during story time, her hypervigilance in crowded spaces, her reluctance to be touched. But none of it was loud enough until one adult chose to really look. We must confront this hard truth. Systems fail children when communities choose comfort over courage, when adults decide that awkwardness or fear of being wrong is more important than the safety of a child. What if that upstairs neighbor had called just once? What if someone had knocked on the door during one of those long, terrifying nights? What if the school had conducted a wellness check sooner? These questions hang heavy because they are not hypothetical, they're real, and they demand answers not to punish but to transform. In the aftermath of Amaya's rescue, the school district launched a training series for all staff on trauma signs and response. The apartment complex partnered with a local advocacy group to offer residents workshops on how to recognize abuse and when to report it. It was a start, but it should not have taken a 6-year-old girl whispering, "It hurts when I sit," to move a community into action. Her pain was real long before her words were heard, and for every Amaya there are others still waiting for someone to notice, someone to believe them, someone to be brave. Let us be clear, silence is complicity, and every adult has a role to play, because no child should have to carry the weight of survival alone. Amaya didn't return to Lincoln Elementary the next week. Her classroom chair stayed empty, her desk untouched. Her classmates didn't know where she had gone, just that the quiet girl with the braids and soft voice wasn't there anymore. But she wasn't lost. She was beginning something new, something fragile, uncertain, but full of possibility. A life not ruled by fear. The foster home she entered wasn't perfect. No home can erase trauma, but it was safe. The first night she had her own bed, a soft blanket, a nightlight, and no footsteps approaching her door in the dark. She clung to Mr. Waffles as she fell asleep. The house was quiet, but not heavy. For the first time in a long while, Amaya could exhale. The couple who took her in, Maria and James, were experienced. They knew what healing looked like. Messy, slow, non-linear. They didn't expect her to open up right away. They didn't flood her with questions. Instead, they offered simple routines. Breakfast with orange juice and cereal, walks around the block, bedtime stories with soft voices. And little by little, Amaya responded. She still flinched at certain sounds, still paused before entering a room, still struggled to answer direct questions. But she smiled more. She drew pictures again. Pictures of houses with gardens, of girls holding balloons, of suns with long eyelashes. Each sketch was a whisper of hope. Meanwhile, her case moved through the system. The man who hurt her, Darren, was found hiding at a cousin's house 2 towns over. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse and sexual assault. He denied everything at first, then changed his story when faced with the evidence. Amaya's testimony, recorded with care and compassion, became central to the prosecution, but she would not have to face him in court. Her words were enough. And for once, the system chose to believe a black girl the first time. As for her mother, the situation was more complicated. She had failed to protect her daughter. Whether out of ignorance, fear, or denial, she had left Amaya vulnerable. Child welfare services gave her a strict path toward reunification, counseling, substance abuse testing, parenting classes, and regular supervised visits. Amaya saw her mother again eventually, in a room with soft lighting, toys, and a caseworker nearby. The meeting was quiet. Her mother cried. Amaya didn't. She just sat holding Mr. Waffles, watching the woman who had once stood between her and safety, and didn't. Trust, once broken, takes more than words to repair. But Amaya had choices now, options, people advocating for her, and a future being rebuilt one day at a time. She began attending a new school, smaller, trauma-informed, with counselors trained in resilience work. Her new teacher, Ms. Hall, welcomed her with warmth but no pressure. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to," she said on the first day. "You just have to know. You matter here." Those words stuck, because for so long Amaya's world had told her the opposite, that she was a problem, a burden, something to be quieted or ignored. But now she was starting to hear a different message. You are worthy. You are seen. You are loved. Her healing wasn't a straight line. She had nightmares. Sometimes she refused to eat. Some days she couldn't make it through a full class. But each time she faltered, someone was there to catch her. A therapist, a teacher, a foster mom, a counselor. The cracks in her story didn't disappear, but they no longer defined her. Amaya was not broken. She was blooming, slowly, silently, defiantly. Because even the most delicate flowers can grow through concrete, if given just enough light. Imagine for a moment that it wasn't Amaya. Imagine it was your daughter, your niece, your student, the little girl down the street who always waves from her window. What would you do if she whispered, "It hurts when I sit"? Would you pause? Would you press? Would you believe her the first time? Because here's the truth we must all confront. Amaya's story is not rare. It is not exceptional. It is one thread in a tapestry of silence that stretches across neighborhoods, cities, and systems. And every time we ignore the signs, every time we assume someone else will step in, a child like Amaya stays trapped just a little longer. This story is not just a narrative, it's a mirror. It reflects how deeply our society struggles to listen to black girls, how we misread their pain, how we expect them to be strong, composed, mature, when what they really are is children desperate for safety, softness, and care. What happened to Amaya should never have reached that point, but it did, because someone looked away, because someone said, "It's not my business," because someone decided that quiet meant fine. But then one person made a different choice. Mr. Thompson didn't have all the answers. He didn't know exactly what was wrong, but he knew what he saw wasn't right, and that was enough. He chose to act. That single moment of courage, born not from expertise but from compassion, ripped a child away from the hands of her abuser and gave her a second chance. It wasn't easy. It never is. The path from silence to safety is littered with doubt, paperwork, resistance, and fear. But it's also paved with people who choose not to look away, people who stay, who ask the hard questions, who make the call. So now we turn to you. What role will you play? Will you be the one who notices, who checks in, who believes? Or will you pass by, tell yourself it's not your place, and keep walking? Because the difference between a child being rescued or remaining in danger often lies in a single moment, a single question, a single voice saying, "Fa, this is not okay." And when that voice is joined by others, neighbors, teachers, parents, strangers, silence loses its power. This isn't just about saving one child. It's about changing a culture that minimizes harm, that asks victims to prove their pain, that treats some children as worthy of rescue and others as invisible. We have to do better. We have to see more, and we have to believe sooner. Because if Amaya taught us anything, it's this. Children don't always cry for help. Sometimes they whisper, and when they do, the world must be quiet enough to listen and brave enough to respond. If this story reached you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel something deep, then don't leave without doing your part. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep sharing voices that too often go unheard. Like this video to help it reach someone who might need it today. And comment below, "I will not look away." Let it be a promise to yourself and to every child like Amaya, because your voice matters, your awareness matters, and together we can build a world where no child has to whisper to be saved. Watch the next story, it's already on the screen. And remember, one act of courage can change everything.